November 1942, North Africa. A German Panzer commander laughed when he first saw it. A thin metal tube that looked like a plumber's pipe. American soldiers called it the Bazooka. The Germans called it a toy. Within minutes, that commander's 50-ton tank was a burning coffin. What happened next would rewrite the rules of armored warfare forever and turn the most mocked weapon of World War II into the nightmare that haunted every German tank crew from the deserts of Tunisia to the frozen forests of the Ardennes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The story begins not with thunder and steel, but with desperation and innovation. In the spring of 1942, American military planners faced a terrifying problem. German Panzer divisions were crushing Allied forces across Europe and North Africa with seemingly unstoppable armored might. The standard American anti-tank weapon, the 37mm gun, was already obsolete. Soldiers grimly called it the door knocker, because its shells bounced off German tank armor like pebbles thrown at a fortress wall. American infantry had no portable weapon that could stop a German tech. They were being slaughtered. At the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, the team of engineers worked frantically on a solution. Leading them was Captain Leslie Skinner, a quiet artillery officer with a background in chemistry, and Lieutenant Edward Ull, a young engineer who had joined the Army just 2 years earlier. They had been experimenting with rockets, trying to create a weapon that ordinary soldiers could carry and fire. The concept was simple but revolutionary. Instead of using a gun barrel to propel a shell with explosive force, they would use a rocket motor. The projectile would carry its own propulsion, meaning the launcher could be lightweight and portable. But rockets were notoriously inaccurate and difficult to aim. Every previous attempt had failed. In May 1942, Lieutenant Ull had a breakthrough moment that would change warfare forever. He was examining sections of steel tubing in the workshop, looking for materials to test rocket stability. He picked up a length of pipe used for musical instruments, held it to his shoulder like a rifle, and suddenly realized this could be the answer. A simple tube. No complex mechanics, no heavy barrel, just a hollow tube that a soldier could carry, aim, and fire. He rushed to Captain Skinner with the idea. Within days, they had assembled a prototype. It was crude, almost comically simple. A steel tube 5 feet long with a basic grip and trigger mechanism. They loaded one of their experimental rockets, took it to the firing range, and aimed at a target tank hull. The first shot missed completely. The rocket spiraled wildly off course, tumbling end over end before crashing into the dirt 200 yards away. The observing officers shook their heads. Another failure. But Skinner and Ull refused to quit. They adjusted the rocket fins, modified the tube length, changed the propellant mixture, test after test, failure after failure. Then, on a hot afternoon in June 1942, everything came together. Lieutenant Ull shouldered the weapon, aimed at a derelict tank 100 yards away, and squeezed the trigger. The rocket screamed from the tube in a blast of flame and smoke. 2 seconds later, it punched through the tank's armor with a devastating explosion that sent metal shrapnel flying in every direction. The observers stood in stunned silence. Then, someone started cheering. During one of the tests, an observer noted that it made a strange whistling sound, like a musical instrument. Someone mentioned the bazooka, a comedic horn-like instrument played by radio comedian Bob Burns. The name stuck instantly. Within weeks, the bazooka was approved for immediate production. By September 1942, the first units were being shipped to troops preparing for Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. The soldiers who received them were skeptical at best. openly mocking at worst. The weapon looked ridiculous. A metal tube with a wooden stock and a simple wire sight. No sophisticated optics, no complex firing mechanism, just a pipe. Sergeant Maria Castellano of the 1st Infantry Division held one for the first time in October 1942 at a training camp in England. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman from Pittsburgh who'd worked in her father's steel mill before joining the Army. When the supply officer handed her the bazooka, she actually laughed. "You're telling me this pipe is supposed to stop a Panzer?" she said, turning it over in her hands. "The Krauts are going to laugh themselves to death before we even fire it." The supply officer didn't smile. "Just learn how to use it, Sergeant. You're going to need it." The training was surprisingly simple. Load the rocket from the rear, make sure the electrical contacts connect properly, aim through the basic sight, squeeze the trigger. The rocket would do the rest. The effective range was listed as 300 yards, but instructors recommended waiting until tanks were within 100 yards for guaranteed penetration. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria practiced with her squad for 2 weeks. They learned to operate in 2-person teams. The gunner carried and fired the weapon. The loader carried the rockets and handled the ammunition. Communication was critical. The backblast from the rocket motor was dangerous, extending 30 feet behind the weapon. Anyone standing in that zone would be seriously injured or killed. The loader had to tap the gunner's helmet to confirm the rocket was loaded and the backblast area was clear. Only then could the gunner fire. During training exercises, Maria's team became proficient quickly. The weapon was so simple that even in darkness or under stress, they could load and fire in under 10 seconds. But the real question remained unanswered. Would it actually work against real German armor in actual combat? November 8, 1942. Operation Torch began with Allied landings across North Africa. American forces hit the beaches of Morocco and Algeria, pushing inland toward Tunisia, where German and Italian forces were concentrated. The bazooka teams went ashore carrying their weapons carefully, still uncertain about their effectiveness. The Germans had been fighting in North Africa for nearly 2 years. Their Panzer divisions were experienced, confident, and equipped with some of the most advanced tanks in the world. The Panzer Mark III and Mark IV were formidable machines, armed with powerful guns and protected by thick armor that had proven nearly invincible against British and American weapons. German tank commanders had developed tactics that maximized their advantages. They operated in coordinated groups, supporting each other with overlapping fields of fire. They used terrain intelligently, positioning themselves on high ground where they could see approaching enemies from long distances. When Allied infantry attacked, the Panzers would engage from ranges where infantry weapons were completely ineffective. The Germans would destroy enemy formations before they could even get close enough to fight back. It was a system that had worked perfectly for 3 years, from Poland to France to Russia to North Africa. The German tank crews believed they were untouchable. They had every reason for that confidence. November 26, 1942, near Tebourba, Tunisia. Sergeant Maria Castellano's squad was dug in along a rocky ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Intelligence reported German armor in the area, moving to counterattack American positions. Her squad had been issued 2 bazookas and a dozen rockets. They waited in the cold dawn, watching the valley through the morning mist. At 0630 hours, they heard the sound every infantryman dreaded: the grinding rumble of tank engines and the metallic clank of treads on stone. Through the fog, dark shapes emerged. Panzer Mark IVs, 3 of them, moving in a wedge formation. They were 400 yards away, too far for effective bazooka range. Maria and her partner, Private Rebecca Torres from Texas, crouched behind a boulder, watching the tanks approach. The Panzers moved slowly, confidently. Their commanders stood in the open turrets, scanning the terrain with binoculars. They weren't expecting serious resistance.
American infantry had proven incapable of stopping tanks in previous engagements. These commanders were relaxed, almost casual. Maria could see one of them smoking a cigarette, his tank commander's cap tilted back on his head. The tanks rumbled closer. 300 yards, still too far. The backblast from the bazooka would reveal their position instantly, and at that range, a miss was almost certain. They had to wait. 250 yards, 200 yards. Maria's hands were sweating despite the cold morning air. Rebecca had already loaded the rocket, the electrical contacts properly aligned. She tapped Maria's helmet twice, ready to fire. But Maria held her hand up. Wait, not yet. The lead Panzer was 120 yards away when Maria finally raised the bazooka to her shoulder. She centered the simple wire sight on the tank's hull, just below the turret where the armor was thinnest. The tank commander was still standing in his hatch, completely unaware of the danger. Maria took a breath, let it out slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The bazooka roared. Flame and smoke erupted from both ends of the tube. The rocket screamed across the valley in a streak of fire. For 2 seconds, everything seemed frozen. Then the rocket struck the Panzer's side armor with a tremendous explosion. The shaped charge warhead, containing just 2 pounds of high explosive, focused its blast into a superheated jet of metal and gas that burned through the tank's armor like a blowtorch through butter. The penetration was catastrophic. Inside the tank, the crew experienced hell in an instant. The shaped charged jet punched through the armor and exploded into the crew compartment, instantly killing the driver and gunner. The tank's ammunition began cooking off in a chain reaction of explosions. Secondary detonations ripped the tank apart from inside. Black smoke poured from every hatch and vision port. The commander, still standing in the turret, tried desperately to climb out. He made it halfway before another explosion threw him clear. He landed hard on the ground, his uniform on fire, and lay motionless. The entire destruction took less than 5 seconds from impact to final explosion.
The 2 trailing Panzers stopped immediately, their commanders shouting orders in confusion and panic. They had never seen anything like this. American infantry didn't have weapons capable of destroying tanks. It was impossible. Maria and Rebecca were already repositioning, running to a new location before the German tanks could identify their position. The backblast had created a huge cloud of dust and smoke, marking their original firing point, but they were 50 yards away before the Germans could react. The second bazooka team, positioned 100 yards to Maria's left, fired at the middle tank. Another hit. Another devastating explosion. The Panzer's turret lifted completely off the hull, blown free by the force of its own exploding ammunition. It crashed back down at an angle, trapping anyone still alive inside. The third tank's commander made a fatal decision. Instead of reversing and retreating, he ordered his driver forward, trying to close the distance and overrun the American positions with speed and firepower. His tank's gun fired wildly, high explosive shells detonating against the rocks where he thought the bazookas were located. But Maria's team had already moved again. At 80 yards range, almost point blank for anti-tank combat, Maria fired her second rocket. This one struck the Panzer's frontal armor, the thickest part of the tank. The shaped charge penetrated anyway. The explosion killed the driver instantly and disabled the engine. The tank coasted forward another 20 feet before grinding to a halt, smoke pouring from its engine compartment. The crew bailed out through the hatches, hands raised in surrender. They had no desire to burn alive inside their steel coffin. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. 3 German Panzers destroyed or disabled by 6 American soldiers with weapons that looked like plumber's pipes. The German prisoners were brought to the American lines, their faces still black with smoke, their expressions showing pure shock. One of them, a sergeant who had fought in Russia and France, kept repeating the same phrase in broken English. Impossible, impossible, infantry cannot kill tanks. But they had, and the news spread like wildfire through both armies. American soldiers who had feared German armor suddenly realized they had a weapon that could fight back. They weren't helpless anymore. German tank crews who had considered themselves invulnerable suddenly understood they could be killed by individual soldiers hiding behind rocks with simple tube weapons. The psychological impact was enormous. The bazooka's first combat success created immediate demand for more weapons and more training. Commanders who had been skeptical now demanded bazookas for every infantry unit. Production increased dramatically. By January 1943, factories were producing thousands of bazookas monthly. The improved M9A1 model included a two-piece barrel that could be broken down for easier transport and a better sight system for improved accuracy. The German response was confusion and denial. After the first bazooka encounters in North Africa, German intelligence officers interrogated survivors and examined destroyed tanks. Their reports to Berlin expressed disbelief at the weapon's simplicity and effectiveness. One German ordnance report from December 1942, captured later in Tunisia, stated in precise military language, "Enemy infantry appears equipped with portable rocket launchers of simple construction, capable of penetrating frontal armor of Mark IV tanks at ranges below 100 meters. Weapon design is crude but highly effective. Recommend immediate development of countermeasures." But what countermeasures could be developed? The bazooka worked by concentrating explosive force into a shaped charge jet. No amount of tactical changes could eliminate the threat completely. Tanks could try to stay at longer ranges, but that limited their effectiveness in infantry support roles. They could add more armor, but that made tanks heavier, slower, and more fuel-hungry. The German propaganda machine initially dismissed the bazooka as desperation weapons used by inferior soldiers. Radio broadcasts from Berlin mocked the American pipe weapons as evidence that the United States couldn't produce real military equipment. German training films showed soldiers how to recognize and avoid bazooka teams, but the advice was often useless in actual combat. Avoid close-range combat with enemy infantry, the manual said. Maintain distances of 500 meters or more. Use high-explosive shells to suppress enemy positions before advancing. In theory, this was sound advice. In practice, it was often impossible. Combat didn't happen at carefully maintained ranges. Tanks and infantry fought in villages, forests, mountains, and cities where visibility was limited and ranges were close. In those environments, the bazooka teams were deadly. Sergeant Maria Castellano became something of a legend in her division. She was credited with 4 confirmed tank kills in North Africa and was recommended for a Silver Star. In interviews with Army historians, she described the bazooka's impact on soldier morale. "Before we had these weapons, we were terrified of German tanks," she said. "We would hear them coming and just pray they didn't find us because we couldn't do anything except hide or die. After we got bazookas and saw what they could do, everything changed. We weren't afraid anymore. We knew we could fight back. That changed everything." Her words captured the weapon's true significance. The bazooka didn't just destroy tanks. It destroyed the psychological dominance that German armor had established. It gave infantry soldiers the confidence to stand and fight rather than retreat in panic when tanks appeared. The tactical evolution happened rapidly as both sides adapted to the new reality. By early 1943, American infantry doctrine had completely incorporated bazooka teams into standard operations. Every rifle company now had dedicated anti-tank sections trained specifically in bazooka employment. The training emphasized patience, positioning, and teamwork. Successful bazooka gunners learned to think like hunters, not soldiers. They studied tank behavior, learned to identify weak points in armor, and mastered the art of ambush. The most effective teams were those who could remain completely hidden until the perfect moment, then strike with devastating precision before disappearing into cover. Private Rebecca Torres, Maria Castellano's original loader, was promoted to sergeant and given her own bazooka team by March 1943. She developed tactics that would be taught at infantry schools for decades afterward. Her innovation was using terrain to maximum advantage. Instead of fighting tanks on open ground where the armor had every advantage, Rebecca positioned her teams in narrow defiles, dense vegetation, or urban environments where tanks were forced to move slowly and their fields of vision were restricted. In these environments, a two-person bazooka team could control an entire avenue of approach, making it suicidal for tanks to advance. Her techniques were documented in after-action reports and disseminated throughout the army as best practices for anti-tank warfare.
The German response was increasingly desperate. Tank crews began welding additional armor plates to their vehicles, creating makeshift protection called Schürzen or skirts. These thin metal plates hung on the sides of tanks, spaced several inches away from the main armor. The theory was that the bazooka's shaped charge would detonate against the skirt, dissipating its energy before reaching the actual tank armor. It was partially effective. Bazooka teams learned to aim for areas without skirts or to fire multiple rockets at the same target. The Germans also began modifying their tactics, keeping tanks further back and relying more heavily on infantry screens to prevent close approaches. But these changes came at a cost. Tanks that stayed at distance were less effective at supporting infantry. Tank crews who were constantly worried about ambush were less aggressive and less effective in combat. The psychological toll on German tankers became severe. Veteran crews who had fought confidently across Europe now approached every engagement with fear and caution. Letters home from German soldiers, later captured and analyzed by Allied intelligence, revealed the depth of their anxiety. One Panzer commander wrote to his wife in April 1943, "We no longer feel safe inside our tanks. Every rock, every building, every bush could hide one of these American rocket weapons. Hans was killed last week. His tank was hit from 50 meters away. He never saw the enemy. We are tired and afraid all the time now." These letters painted a picture of an army whose confidence was crumbling, not from lack of courage, but from facing a threat they couldn't effectively counter. The Sicily invasion in July 1943 demonstrated the bazooka's effectiveness in new terrain. The mountainous landscape and narrow roads of Sicily created perfect conditions for anti-tank ambushes. German and Italian armored forces, attempting to counterattack the Allied beachheads, found themselves channeled into predictable routes where bazooka teams waited patiently. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Hayes from Chicago led a team that destroyed 5 Italian tanks in a single afternoon near Gela. Her position overlooked a coastal road where Italian armor was attempting to reach the beaches. From her concealed position in an olive grove, 80 yards from the road, Jennifer and her loader engaged each tank as it passed, firing, reloading, and firing again with mechanical efficiency. The Italian tank column ground to a halt as burning vehicles blocked the road. The surviving tanks retreated. Their mission failed. Their confidence shattered. Jennifer's success wasn't unusual. Across Sicily, dozens of similar engagements occurred. American infantry, previously vulnerable to armored counterattacks, now held their positions confidently because they possessed weapons capable of stopping tanks. The German and Italian commanders found their armored advantages neutralized by simple weapons wielded by determined soldiers. The battle hung in the balance for several days as German armor pushed deep into American positions. But bazooka teams positioned throughout the defensive lines exacted a terrible toll. Every German advance was met with rocket fire from multiple directions. Tanks that penetrated the American lines found themselves isolated and vulnerable, hunted by small teams of infantry who used the broken terrain to approach within killing range. The German offensive stalled not from lack of tanks or courage, but from unsustainable losses to a weapon their doctrine had never anticipated. Corporal Diana Rodriguez earned a Bronze Star at Salerno for actions that exemplified the bazooka's tactical impact. Her team was positioned near a destroyed farmhouse when 6 German Panzers broke through the American lines at dawn. Instead of retreating, Diana led her team directly toward the advancing tanks, using a drainage ditch for concealment. At 60 yards range, she fired into the side of the lead tank, destroying it instantly. The explosion blocked the narrow farm road, forcing the following tanks to halt and maneuver around the burning wreck. Diana's team moved position and fired again, hitting a second tank.
The German formation broke apart in confusion, individual tanks reversing and turning, trying to identify where the deadly fire was coming from. In the chaos, other bazooka teams engaged from different directions. Within 10 minutes, 4 of the 6 tanks were burning. The remaining 2 retreated at full speed, their commanders unwilling to continue advancing into what had become a killing ground. Diana's actions were celebrated not just for their immediate tactical success, but for what they represented about American infantry capabilities. A single soldier with a simple weapon had stopped a tank assault that could have collapsed an entire defensive sector. The story spread throughout both armies, inspiring American soldiers and terrifying German tankers. The mathematical equation of armored warfare had been rewritten. One determined soldier with a bazooka could neutralize tens of millions of dollars worth of tanks and the years of training invested in their crews. The force multiplier effect was extraordinary. Infantry units that would have been helpless against armor now possessed offensive anti-tank capability that fundamentally changed tactical planning. As 1943 turned into 1944, American industry ramped up bazooka production to unprecedented levels. The weapon's simplicity allowed rapid manufacturing using existing industrial capacity. By D-Day and June 1944, over 400,000 bazookas had been produced and distributed to American forces worldwide. Every infantry regiment had substantial anti-tank capability organic to its structure. The weapon had evolved as well. The M9A1 model included numerous improvements based on combat feedback. The barrel could be separated into 2 pieces for easier transport. The electrical firing system was more reliable. The sights were improved for better accuracy. The rockets themselves were upgraded with more powerful shaped charge warheads capable of penetrating even the heaviest German armor. The hedgerows that made Normandy such difficult terrain also provided perfect concealment for small infantry teams. Bazooka gunners could position themselves within 50 yards of roads and trails, completely hidden in the dense vegetation, waiting for German armor to pass. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell commanded a battalion that fought through the hedgerows in July 1944. She personally observed dozens of bazooka engagements and documented their effectiveness in official reports. "The German tanks are formidable machines," she wrote, "but they are blind in this terrain. Our bazooka teams can approach within point-blank range without being detected. I witnessed a single team destroy 2 Panther tanks in less than 5 minutes. The Germans are terrified of these weapons. Their tank commanders refuse to advance without extensive infantry support, which slows their operations dramatically and gives us tactical advantages we exploit ruthlessly." Her observations confirmed what had become clear throughout the theater. The bazooka had shifted the balance of power decisively toward infantry forces willing to fight aggressively. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided the ultimate test of the bazooka's effectiveness under the worst possible conditions. German forces launched their last major offensive, achieving complete surprise and pushing deep into American lines. The weather was brutally cold, with snow and ice making movement difficult and visibility poor. German Panzer divisions, held in reserve specifically for this offensive, attacked with overwhelming force at multiple points. American infantry units found themselves surrounded and outnumbered, fighting desperately to hold key positions. In these desperate circumstances, the bazooka proved its worth beyond any doubt. Small groups of soldiers, often cut off from their units and surrounded by German armor, fought back effectively using the simple rocket launchers. At Bastogne, the besieged 101st Airborne Division used bazookas as their primary anti-tank defense. German tanks attempted repeatedly to break into the town, but every approach was covered by bazooka teams dug into positions throughout the perimeter. Captain Linda Washington commanded one of these teams, positioned in the ruins of a barn on the northern edge of town.
For 3 days, her team engaged German armor attempting to advance down the Bastogne-Houffalize road. She personally fired 19 rockets, claiming 7 confirmed tank kills and several more damaged vehicles. Her position was under constant artillery fire and small arms attack, but she refused to abandon it because it covered a critical approach route. When relief forces finally reached Bastogne, they found Linda still at her post, exhausted but defiant, her bazooka ready for another engagement. The psychological impact on German forces during the Battle of the Bulge was profound. Tank commanders who had launched the offensive with confidence found themselves unable to exploit their numerical superiority because small groups of American infantry armed with bazookas turned every position into a potential death trap. German after-action reports captured after the battle expressed frustration and despair. One Panzer Division commander wrote, "American infantry resistance is unexpectedly fierce. Their portable anti-tank weapons are present in numbers we did not anticipate. Our tanks cannot advance without prohibitive casualties." The American soldier, previously considered inferior to German troops, fights with determination and possesses weapons that neutralize our armor advantage. The admission was remarkable, coming from a German officer.
The Americans, dismissed as soft and inexperienced at the war's beginning, had proven themselves superior through better equipment and fighting spirit. The technological race continued throughout 1945 as Germany desperately tried to develop countermeasures. They introduced the Panzerschreck, a direct copy of the American bazooka design, and the Panzerfaust, a simpler, disposable anti-tank weapon. These weapons were effective, but Germany's collapsing industrial base could not produce them in sufficient quantities. American factories, operating at full capacity, produced bazookas and rockets in numbers that Germany couldn't match. By the war's end, American forces had over 470,000 bazookas in service, with millions of rockets available for immediate use. The industrial advantage that characterized American warfare was fully evident in anti-tank weapons, just as it was in every other category of military equipment. The final campaigns in Germany saw bazooka teams fighting in urban environments where their weapons were supremely effective. Cities provided countless ambush positions, and German tanks attempting to navigate narrow streets became easy targets for teams positioned in buildings and rubble. Sergeant Michelle Torres fought through the Ruhr industrial region in April 1945, her team clearing towns block by block. She described the urban fighting as hunting, not warfare. Her team would identify German tank positions, approach through buildings or sewers, and engage at ranges often less than 30 yards. At such close range, no tank could survive. Michelle's team claimed 11 tank kills during the final month of combat, each one a testament to the bazooka's effectiveness in close-quarters battle. The human cost of German stubbornness became clear in the war's final weeks. Tank crews who could have surrendered chose to fight rather than abandon their vehicles, often dying in burning steel coffins when bazooka rockets found their marks. The tragedy was that these deaths accomplished nothing. Germany had already lost the war, but ideology and discipline kept soldiers fighting in hopeless situations. American bazooka teams, who had learned to respect German soldiers as worthy opponents, took no pleasure in these final engagements. They understood they were fighting men who had no choice but to continue a lost war. The bazooka had proved its worth not through glory, but through grim effectiveness, destroying machines and killing crews who were trapped by circumstances beyond their control. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the bazooka's combat record was undeniable. Over 470,000 launchers had been produced. Millions of rockets had been fired in combat. Thousands of enemy tanks had been destroyed by infantry teams using weapons that cost less than $100 to manufacture. The return on investment was extraordinary. The bazooka had proven that technological advantage didn't require complexity or expense. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective.
The shaped charge warhead and rocket propulsion were not new technologies, but combining them into a portable infantry weapon was revolutionary. That revolution had been accomplished by two American officers working in a workshop with basic materials and determination to solve a critical problem. The legacy of the bazooka extended far beyond World War II. Every modern anti-tank weapon traces its lineage to that simple tube developed in 1942. The principle of infantry portable anti-tank rockets became universal in military doctrine worldwide. The Soviet RPG series, used in conflicts for decades after the war, was directly inspired by captured bazookas and Panzers.
Every insurgent group and irregular force that fought against conventional armor in subsequent conflicts used descendants of the bazooka design. The weapon democratized anti-tank warfare, proving that determined infantry could defeat armored forces regardless of technological or numerical superiority. That lesson shaped military thinking for generations. For the women who carried bazookas in combat, the weapon represented more than tactical capability. It symbolized the American approach to warfare, where practical problem-solving and industrial capacity mattered more than tradition or ideology. Sergeant Maria Castellano, who fired the first combat bazooka shots in North Africa, survived the war and returned to Pittsburgh. In interviews decades later, she reflected on the weapon's significance. "We weren't trying to be heroes," she said. "We were just soldiers doing a job. But that job was easier because someone gave us a weapon that worked. The bazooka was simple, reliable, and effective. That's all any soldier really wants, a tool that works when your life depends on it." Her words captured the essence of the weapon's success and the reason it remained in service for decades. The German soldiers who had mocked the bazooka in 1942 learned bitter lessons about underestimating American ingenuity and industrial power. Their initial contempt for the pipe weapon transformed into fear and respect as the war progressed. Captured German soldiers, interviewed after the war, consistently cited the bazooka as one of the most feared American weapons. Not because it was sophisticated or impressive in appearance, but because it was everywhere, in the hands of ordinary soldiers who used it with devastating effectiveness. The psychological impact of facing an enemy where every infantryman could be a tank killer fundamentally altered German tactical planning and morale throughout the final years of the war. The bazooka story is ultimately about human courage amplified by effective technology. The women and men who carried these weapons into combat demonstrated that determination and proper equipment could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. They faced 50-ton steel monsters armed with cannons and machine guns, yet they stood their ground and fought back with simple tube launchers and shaped charge rockets. Their courage wasn't reckless bravery, but calculated confidence based on possessing weapons that gave them a fighting chance. That confidence transformed American infantry from victims of German armor into effective opponents who could contest the battlefield on equal terms. The transformation was complete when German tank commanders, once confident in their invulnerability, began operating with the same fear and caution that had previously characterized Allied infantry.